We will be joined by Mr. Alberto Cirio, MP, who plane has just landed. He was delayed and the car's collected him, so we should be here in about 20 minutes. But if I may introduce the speakers. Firstly, Mr. Fulvio Marticello, who kindly sponsored this meeting. Thank you very much, Mr. Marticello. And from Copa Cogia, the leading agriculture NGO in Europe, Mr. Peck. And also we have Mr. Dmitry Fomenko, hello, thank you, who is a Ukrainian investor. And I won't bother introducing everybody else. Perhaps you could, in the round table when you speak afterwards, you could introduce yourselves. This round table is basically about the concern and the opacity of government subsidies in the Ukraine in support of the agricultural sector.
The government subsidy of oligarch structures and ignoring of small and medium-sized businesses is another case in point. Namely, in 2017, the Parliament of Ukraine approved the budget for the government subsidies for the entire agricultural sector of the Ukraine to the tune of €130 million. This is a trifling amount for the country in which the agriculture is the main budget revenue generating industry. But even under these conditions, 35% of government subsidies of the entire agricultural sector were allocated to one multi-billion company, Muranovsky Hilbo Product, or MHP. MHP is one of the largest industrial and most profitable agricultural holdings in the country, engaged in poultry production. The CEO and main beneficiary of the company is Yuri Kosyuk, who ranks amongst the wealthiest people in the world. His Forbes rating gives a fortune of $1.2 billion.
So, thank you for your presence. My colleague Alberto Cirio is coming, so here is the head of his office, but he is coming joining us. So, it's a really important topic, and I want to announce today that after this meeting I will present an interrogation regarding this topic. So it's a really important topic. So in 2015, the EU allocated 1.8 billion to Ukraine under the macro-financial assistance program, and the IMF another $17.5 US. In both cases, Ukraine was unable to receive money in full since it failed to comply with the EU and the IMF requirements before the deadline, including the requirements of anti-corruption reform implementation. On 28 February 2018, the European Commission prepared a new package of macro-financial assistance for Ukraine in the amount of €1 billion in two tranches of euro, 500 million each. If the EC proposal is approved by the European Parliament and the Council of Europe within the next couple of months, Ukraine will be able to receive the first tranche in July-September of the current year. The new EU requirements will also be related to the fight against corruption in Ukraine. The financial assistance allocated to Ukraine by the European Union is composed of budgetary funds which are formed, among other sources, from a contribution of EU taxpayers, and we watch closely how Ukraine fulfills its obligation and the state's policy in the country in general. We will remind that the IMF and the ABRD have again and again drawn attention of Ukrainian authorities to the issue of establishing the independent anti-corruption courts. From the situation we are observing today in Ukraine, in the sphere of the budget funds distribution in agriculture, where all sins of corruption are present, we call on Ukrainian authorities to address the issue of independent courts creation. This will allow not only to overcome corruption, but also to make the work of the official more transparent. So today I'll present an interrogation regarding this topic. I want to give the floor at the head of the office of Mr. Alberto Cirio. In 10 minutes, the member of the European Parliament will join us, and then we can open this roundtable. Okay?
Thank you very much.
Gentlemen, it's a pleasure to be here. My name is Petri Pesonen, and I'm Secretary General of COPA and COSECA, European Farmers and Agri Cooperatives here in Brussels. We represent approximately 70 national farm organizations, full members in the EU 28, and we also have links with other farming communities around the world, and also, of course, in the continent of Europe. We also have, we are in the process of setting up relations with our Ukrainian counterparts, and I've been to Kiev myself a few times, and also we met our Ukrainian colleagues here in Brussels. And the reason that I'm so pleased to be here today is very much in line with our European agricultural policy, our trade policy objectives, and to support the initiative to become more transparent, especially when it comes to future closer cooperation between Ukraine and the European Union. From agricultural perspective, this is enormously important, especially because of the market reasons. We are very much tied already with the Ukrainian agricultural sector, especially arable crops, products that like poultry meat, and we would like to also put out the message that this increased transparency is hugely important also when it comes to European standards, where Ukraine has committed itself to come forward with their improvements in line with the European Union hard work that the farming community with other stakeholders in the value chain are committed to in the EU. And this is very important not only for the farming community and food sector on its own, but it's very important for the consumers, that the benefits that they expect in areas of sanitary controls, food safety, animal welfare, increased environmental performance, environmental sustainability, these will be respected. We are seeking for good collaboration with our colleagues in Ukraine, and in the coming weeks we actually are engaging ourselves with further talks in some of these aspects. It's very much about very concrete issues that we are interested also, in addition to the European Union, Ukrainian common expenditure, and how the European Union is supported to Ukraine. But then I would like to also underline the importance of sustainable market development. We all across the agricultural sector at the international level, we suffer from volatile markets. This is hugely important also here in Europe. And second item that I pointed out already is elements that we need to have better coordination in future, such as African swine fever that is spreading in the east of Europe, and we're quite worried about that. It's affecting also Ukrainian own production, and therefore it's crucially important that the European continent has joint action across the board, including even the Russian Federation, in order to combat this particular pest. And in this respect, we are pleased to see some progress, but we would like to see some concrete action also from the Ukrainian side when it comes to reporting back to the European Union in accordance with our mutual agreement from a few years ago. But I'll leave it to that, and of course if you have any questions or comments, I would be pleased to take part in the debate.
Well, we're still waiting for Alberto, but in the meantime, let's have some questions and answers. Can I start off by asking Pekka, What are the real lessons that Ukraine can learn from the European experience of subsidies and how to administer it?
Well, first of all, the whole issue of transparency is very well known in Europe, also for our own reasons over the past few years. And this is a big move and big development, not only in agriculture, but all across the various policy areas. And we're very committed to that. It ranges all the way from this declaration of the support schemes at certain level amongst farmers to use of growth promoters, antibiotics, all sorts of technology-driven linked elements that farmers need to declare. And in this respect, we can conclude by saying that, especially for our colleagues in Ukraine, the consumer expectations are more visible in the daily work of a farmer. And especially when it comes to technologies, the consumers are increasingly interested in the technologies that have been used. Some of them, some consumers, some people have some reservations concerning some technologies, despite the fact that, for instance, issues like the biotech has been over and over again repeatedly proven safe. There are some ethical concerns or some other concerns that the consumers put forward, and at the end it's always the consumer who buys the product. And so therefore European Union agriculture has been going through all my time here, 21 years, transformation where the transparency declaration of various aspects of production is increasingly made available for the consumers. I think the bigger problem for us is that how much the consumers are willing to remunerate that transparency and that particular production method that they possibly would expect from us in pricing and in paying a higher price in supermarkets and in catering businesses across the continent. I think that's the big question that we are struggling with now. And I think I would like to point out that especially when it comes to the European work, especially in areas like salmonella and antibiotics and antimicrobial resistance, this is something that we also have been communicating already with our colleagues in Ukraine. This transparency needs to be enhanced. We are working on that in Europe quite hard. We are involved, our organization, in various initiatives, for instance in antibiotics use in what is called a PRUMA, European platform for responsible use of antimicrobials. And this is a good illustration or indication how we are very much engaged into this work. It is not very easy always, and especially when it comes to cost factors, it is a challenge quite often. But then we have reason to expect that the consumers would eventually pay for the let's say added value that they expect. And this is a common denominator across the sectors. We don't have any particular sector that wouldn't be affected. Later this afternoon I will be here in the same house talking about olive oil, which is perhaps not that much of a product yet with the Ukraine. I think you have some production, but this is hugely important for European-owned farming sector, especially in the south. And this is once again a very good illustration how we come forward with our promotion and our, let's say, talks on the qualitative aspects of a product sector that actually is a significant part of European agriculture. And this added value and this transparency is increasingly the driver for European agriculture, and it's a must. You look at any international trade development, and especially in this house, you see a lot of interest in how food is being used and how food is being produced. And that's why our organization declares that farmers are the first producers of food. And therefore, what happens at the farm level, irrespective where the farms are, they may be outside the borders of the European Union, but in particular when they are in the EU, the consumers are interested in how the food is produced. And so the farmer is the first link, and despite the fact that most of the people here in the room don't have necessarily a direct link with agriculture anymore, people are increasingly interested in how the food is being produced. And that's where we see the opportunity also for farming community. but then we are certainly not yet there, especially when it comes to economics.
We are understanding that the distribution of the subsidies Ukraine appears to be bad, and there is a opportunity for corruption. So I think it's a really important meeting today. We are understanding that the Parliament has to move and to prepare oral question and interrogation. And I will ask all my colleagues to see it. So.
Thank you. Can I?
About the common agricultural policy, which is a fundamental part of our work here in Brussels, also in this house. I would like to point out that CAP is one of the best run policies, despite its, let's say, shortcomings. It's still one of the best common policies in terms of error rate, and especially the famous first pillar, which is the direct payment for farmers. We have very few errors in general in paying those direct payments for farmers. So it's scrutinized, it's controlled several times in fact, and it's enormously bureaucratic, but then when it comes to transparency and correctness, it is probably one of the best policies. But we don't say that it is a perfect policy. Of course, none of the policies are never perfect. But then when you take a look into the CAP within the first pillar and second pillar, the second pillar, which is the rural development, actually has a higher rate of error because of the particular project-based, program-based nature of it. And so while we work for a better policy setup for European agricultural sector, we have to recognize the valuable work that the CAP has provided for the past 60 years. And this is something that also we in the sector quite often forget. What happens in Ukraine is that Ukrainian agriculture comes from a different perspective to the same common policy or agriculture-related policy. While we have substantial contribution from the EU and taxpayers, the Ukrainian contribution, according to the calculation and declaration, is fairly modest for the moment. But our understanding is the government intervention in Ukraine is increasing. So clearly, I should say that we approach the same thing from a slightly different angle. When European Union Common Agricultural Policy has been cut, our resourcing has been diminished, and the conditions where the direct support in particular has been paid have been squeezed. In this respect, the Ukrainian situation is somewhat different. But of course, we start at a fairly low level, as you have been indicated in the press release.
I know a few farmers.
And so balancing the paperwork with the food production capabilities and their objective in producing high quality, safe food has to be balanced. And so for the moment, European Union farmers have to fulfill a lot of paperwork in order to get support, and we accept this. There's no problem in general about this, but it's more to do with the scale. The British farmers have to do a lot of bookkeeping, a lot of reporting back to their agricultural administrators in order to get diminishing level of support. And at the same time, for the international trade reasons, also to a certain extent, thanks to the Ukrainian agreement, we are exposed to more liberal markets and pressures in the marketplace. And therefore, it's quite understandable that British farmers, our full members, at least until the Brexit is executed, are quite frustrated. And some of the British farmers actually were so frustrated that they voted in favor of leaving the Union, despite the fact that they received some support. And so this is a good illustration how the two sides of the coin would actually go together. If we talk about the objectives of the farming community, what we are there for, I think we all agree that the primary work of the farmer is producing food. It's about food security. And secondly, it's how the food is being produced. Famously enough, I think the Pope even said this a few years ago. And we are very committed to that. There's no farmer in the European continent that wouldn't consider production as a priority for his or her, increasingly, by the way, her business. And in doing so, we need to recognize that despite the famous equation of 20% of the farmers get 80% of the support, we have more or less 20% of the farmers producing 80% of the volumes, roughly speaking. And this is a variable between member states. But we have to recognize that when we produce food, that is the objective. And then secondly, it has to be sustainable, in particular this order, because 500 million plus citizens in the EU require stable, affordable, high quality and safe food. And this is exactly the same thing also in Ukraine. And I have absolutely no doubt that Ukrainian consumers or international consumers in general, when they consume Ukrainian agricultural products, would expect exactly the same thing from the Ukrainian agriculture. And so therefore, we are very committed to this, and that when we make the investment, for instance, the qualitative side, it's very much about the food itself, and then how much chicken, how much cereals, how much wine, how much olive oil can we produce, at what price, and can we match the consumer expectations in accordance with the regulations that stipulate minimum requirement for the safety side, sanitary controls, and also taking into account that while we produce food, we let's say fully recognize other nations and other, let's say, regions of the world and their right to produce foodstuffs for their citizens. So this is a global question, and I think in one of the recent meetings in the EU late last year, there was a World Bank representative who said that actually the common agricultural policy in its roots is a good lesson for all parts of the world how to organize one's food production. Of course, once again, it's not perfect, but it's very much about the qualitative aspect and ensuring that the food production is in the long run sustainable, and it provides exactly what the consumers and citizens expect: high quality, affordable, sufficient in volumes, high quality, safe food produced in a sustainable manner. And this is, I think, this is fundamentally the approach that the Ukrainian agriculture would have to comply with too. Not because of European consumers or the CAP or Brussels, but because of the clientele of the Ukrainian agriculture. It's about the people that buy agricultural products from Ukraine and how they relate to the same product. I don't think any Belgian consumer would put any different standards in place when it comes to imported products that they consume vis-a-vis Belgian-owned production here in Flanders and Groot-Ballon. So I think this is clearly also linked with the transparency. When European Union supports neighboring regions, which we support in general, and in their development, I think we need to make sure that it is transparent and we have good value for money also for the European taxpayers, like we talk about within the CAP too, especially in this house.